Kia rana, koutou katoa, talofalava, whakalofalahi atu. As you mentioned, my name is Dan Tautolo, and I lead the Centre for Pacific Health and Development Research at AET. I'm involved with the Better Start Challenge and the Ageing Well Challenge as well, so I sympathise with my Māori colleagues about the difficulties and reluctance to say no. But today I'm here to talk a little bit about some of the work I do on the Pacific Longitudinal Study. And so I'm going to start with sharing some of the findings so far that we've had over the past 18 years, look at some of the work that we're currently doing, including involving the Ageing Well National Science Challenge, and then just end with some words around some of the challenges that we've had in doing the work we do, and also some future considerations around Pacific research. So to begin with, just a little bit about the study. For those of you who are not aware, the Pacific Islands Family Study is a longitudinal birth cohort study of 1,398 Pacific children, all born in the year 2000 at Middlemore Hospital in South Auckland. We also collect information from the parents, from the mothers and fathers as well. So yeah, we've got these long-lasting relationships with families, really. And the study was started to address the lack of information on Pacific people and the need for more Pacific-specific evidence. And a lot of other surveys, even now, there's limited numbers of Pacific people in there. And I just want to take this opportunity to acknowledge Professor Janice Patterson and also Dr. Colin Tukutonga, who were instrumental in getting the study started and leading the study in the early years. In terms of the overall aims of the study, the idea is around identifying and characterising those who experience positive and negative health outcomes, and then trying to understand what are the mechanisms and pathways to those outcomes. And then finally using this evidence to make recommendations to try and improve things, improve the well-being of these Pacific children and their families. So just briefly, I mean, there's a whole lot of information in the past 18 years we've collected, but I'm just going to take you through just some selected findings. So at age 4, we were interested in looking at nutrition and diet amongst our children. And so we assessed them using a nutritional survey, and we found that about a third of them had a very low vegetable intake. Many consumed a more Western diet, foods like milk, bread and fruit, and breakfast cereals, and very few ate Pacific foods. We also found that increased protein intake seemed to be associated with an increase in BMI for the children and also an increase in early childhood weight gain. So these findings were important because we were able to relate them to the growth and body composition of our kids, and also by highlighting the foods that they consumed, perhaps providing an opportunity to modify them to address issues around BMI and obesity. At age 6, we were interested in looking at sedentary behaviour and how that was related to the influence of television watching. And so looking at a subset of the cohort, we used accelerometers, looking at them, measuring their movement and sedentary behaviour, and relating this to BMI information, which we've also collected. And we found that almost 2/3 of them, so almost 60%, were overweight or obese at that time, and that a higher BMI was associated with an increased amount of TV watching, and also interestingly enough, an increase in maternal waist circumference. So this seemed to suggest the link between maternal and child health for these kids. Our next finding that we look at here is at 11 years of age, we were interested in the housing conditions for our families and associating that with maternal depression amongst the mothers. So we had a whole range of housing quality indicators taken from the New Zealand General Social Survey, and we asked those questions also of our Pacific mums, and what we found was that 33% of the mothers felt that the house was too cold, 27% that it was too small, 25% had large numbers, had large household number of household members, and also that housing was too expensive. And having any of these indicators increased their likelihood of reporting psychological distress. So this indicated, compared to the general social survey findings, that there were a number of housing issues for our Pacific people. And I guess one of the other interesting things to think about is that this is from a while ago, when the kids were 11. So it's likely that the situation around housing has worsened since then, particularly given that most of the cohort live in Auckland, where housing prices and housing issues are affecting everyone. Finally, just looking at hearing, we screened the hearing for the kids at age 11. So we did full hearing screens with 920 Pacific children, looking at otoscopy, tympanometry, acoustic reflexes, and also APD. And we found that only 11% had normal peripheral hearing. There was increasing levels of middle ear disease, and we'd also screened them at the age of 2, and we found that those who had middle ear disease at 2 had an odds ratio of 2 for middle ear disease at 11. So there's that link there in terms of persisting issues. And so we felt that this was a really important issue because of the impact it can have in terms of education, the kids being able to hear in the classroom and being engaged in the education system. And so, in fact, based on these findings, we've actually worked with a school in South Auckland, working in the classroom, trying to improve the hearing environment and potentially impact on the educational outcomes for the children there. And just the last sort of previous finding I just wanted to share something a bit more positive or protective was this idea of cultural alignment or identity. So we've collected information around cultural alignment and identity, and that's focusing on facets such as Pacific language, traditional customs and practices, family members and friends. And what we found was that those who were more closely aligned with their traditional Pacific culture had better maternal and infant outcomes. They were, in terms of mothers, they were less prone to single parenthood, unplanned pregnancy, postnatal depression, gestational smoking, and alcohol and intimate partner violence. And for the infants, they were less likely to be admitted to hospital and more likely to be exclusively breastfed as well. So, and in later years, they were also less likely to have behavioural problems at age 4 and 6. So this was important evidence in terms of strengthening this idea around cultural identity as a protective factor, and perhaps incorporating elements of Pacific culture into interventions or strategies. It might be a way of making them more effective for our communities. So next I'm just going to talk about some of the current work that we're doing and based on 3 sort of studies that we're working on. So the first one is looking at, we're interested in leveraging off all of the data we collected in the early life years, so when they were, first born in those first 2 to 4 years, and associating that with their current respiratory function. So the idea is trying to identify risks or resilience factors in their early life years, which we can connect with how they're doing in terms of respiratory health. And this is a real issue because respiratory health is very poor amongst Pacific children and Māori children as well. And so this is an attempt to try and understand, what's going on and some of the underlying things there. So we've got all of that already collected data from the early years, and so now what we're doing is we're assessing their current respiratory function. So they're undertaking spirometry, doing allergy testing through blood samples, having chest x-rays as well. And one of the spin-off effects of this study has been that we've picked up a lot of issues with the kids. And so we've been able to, while we're an observational study, we've been able to at least refer them to get some help to address some of those things, which they've been really grateful for, and which has been a real benefit for us too. And I guess this highlights the importance of longitudinal work and those trajectories. So having that life course approach of being able to relate what happened to them earlier on to what's going on now. And also, because it's a Pacific study, being able to focus on a high-risk population has been really good too. And then finally, in terms of collaboration, it's kind of one of the first times we've collaborated with a clinical team based out at Counties Manukau. So that's been really interesting as well. The second sort of study I just want to talk about looks at Pacific adolescent growth and development. So we've been able to track the height and weight of our children from the age of 2 until now. And what we've found is that they're very big, but that this growth is very rapid. And so by 9 years of age, over 50% of our kids are overweight or obese, which is quite early on for those kinds of issues to occur. So what we wanted to do was look, using that information, construct Z-score trajectories for weight for each child at each age point, and then relate that with metabolic markers for disease. And so we're taking blood samples and looking at things like insulin, leptin, LDL cholesterol, urate, and other things, to try and understand what's driving this rapid growth and potentially ways that we can intervene. And this has been really important again because it's focused on our Pacific cohort. And what we found was that rapid growth was associated with this increased concentration of metabolic risk factors, which can have further long-stream effects in terms of risk for metabolic disease. So this has been really good in terms of a project because we've been able to monitor growth trajectories and potentially highlight areas where we can target interventions, developing the research capacity of our team as well in terms of dealing with these issues, and then again focusing on our Pacific families. And the last bit of work that we're kind of working on at the moment is looking at Pacific grandparents, and this is actually funded by the Aging Well National Science Challenge. So we were looking at healthy Pacific grandparents and looking at issues around social participation, trying to understand what are their needs and the barriers to their engagement in society. And it's a little bit of a departure from what we do with the cohort, although it is slightly related because some of the grandparents are grandparents of our Pacific Islands families' kids. But we've also partnered with an NGO group that works with older age Pacific people based in South Auckland, and so we've gotten participants from them as well. So this is it's a qualitative project based on 3 ethnic groups working with Samoan, Tongan and Cook Islands grandparents. And so we've had a range of focus groups and workshops with them, trying to find out what are their priorities and issues, and then develop those and try and propose solutions and strategies to address those. And I think one of the overarching things within the project has been trying to take a participatory action research approach. So more of a collaboration and working with the grandparents as co-researchers, which has been really rewarding and really interesting, hearing their stories and really empowering them and engaging with them in terms of what things would be solutions for them. It's been challenging too, dealing with the 3 different groups and the language issues, translation and all of those kinds of things. But I think there's going to be some really good outcomes that come from it. And so we're just in that second phase of trying to develop strategies and things that we could develop into interventions. So I just wanted to finish with just some future considerations or things to think about based on all the work that we've done and moving forward into the future. And I guess the first thing is the need for Pacific-focused research. I guess echoing what our Māori colleagues were talking about before, I think we really need to have Pacific leadership within the challenges at all levels, but particularly at the higher levels in terms of leading projects. And I think some of the ring-fenced funding that's been put in place for Māori and Pacific projects is a good start, but if we really want to make changes and make improvements, then we can do much more. And having that Pacific leadership there also allows you to focus on what are the important Pacific issues. And in terms of capacity, I think now is a really good time in terms of Pacific research. There are more and more Pacific PhDs coming along, and just looking for those opportunities to be a part of research within the challenges. So, yeah, that's what I think in terms of that. In terms of collaborations, I think it was mentioned before the importance of collaborating with NGOs and communities, and we do that. I don't know, maybe naturally because it's just the way we work. But yeah, again, I think it's a really important thing to do. But also just being mindful of the time frame and the feasibility of doing things, and just making sure that it's not sort of just at the surface level, but really embedded and going to make a real difference for them as well. And also being funded appropriately to do the work and do it well. And then lastly, just around the idea around accountability and engagement, and I guess that's sort of related to this idea of impact. We really try to ensure that our research makes a difference, and so working with Pacific stakeholders and agencies, Pacific media and stuff is really important for us in terms of getting the message out there and really trying to make an impact for our families and for our communities as well. And then lastly, just this idea of considering who benefits from the work, especially in terms of us as a life course study and longitudinal study. We have ongoing relationships with these families and with these participants as well. So, when we're collaborating and working with people over the span of a project, which might be like 3 years, that's a short time for you, but for us, this is getting on to 20 years plus. So, just be mindful and thinking of the future in terms of who benefits from this work, and just having that whole ethical approach as well. So that's basically it for me. Just acknowledge some of the funders of our work we've done, and if you want further information, there's details here. Thanks for listening.